here. I'm going to try that and see if the broadcasting is there's a little bit of a delay, so if my voice comes through here shortly, I'll know that it was my microphone here, and I apologize. There we go. I'm going to try that and see if so we're working. There's a little bit of a delay, so if my voice comes through here shortly, I'll know. Okay, there we go. Well, I was hoping that my microphone would work, but for some reason I'm not getting any activity from that. So we'll just go with this. And again, my apologies for the problems. I've got my board set up over here to broadcast live, where I was going to do some math problems. So if you'll allow me one quick moment, I'll grab my iPad and we'll be able to work with that. So I'm going to grab that very quickly. And we will be ready to go here. So all I need to do is just kind of hook up my iPad. I use a program called Reflector, and Reflector allows me to reflect my my iPad over to my computer. So we'll get that up, make sure that we're broadcasting loud and clear. So I'm going to do screen sharing to my MacBook, and we should be ready to go. Okay, I think we are up. There we go. Good. All right, so I'm going to minimize that screen and go back over here and minimize this screen as well. I think that'll be all right there. Well, I can take questions from you in this format, and feel free to type those into the chat box. I've got a whiteboard right over there, and I was really excited about trying to use my whiteboard because I haven't been able to use it for a while. I've been moving my office around a little bit, and I like to stream live on YouTube for a couple of reasons. It records the session for us, and so the session just kind of stays there on YouTube. Sometimes when you go through Zoom, the recording doesn't stay on YouTube. So I have to kind of like download it and re-upload it. And I've got a really interesting, neat program, I should say. It's a neat program called Switcher Studio. When it works, it's neat. When it doesn't work like tonight, it's kind of a pain. But I do have a workaround coming for that. It's just, you know, everything, when you go to order some of these new tech tools, especially tools for live streaming, they're just sold out of everything. So I've had this on back order for a few weeks, but it's going to allow me to do some really interesting things with our live streaming. So anyway, that's where we're at. So I'm going to take my camera off here, and just so that you can focus on the iPad, which you should be, you know what? I don't think you can see the iPad from here. I just realized that I need to do that since we're going live on Zoom. Let's see here. Oh, golly, technology. It's always something, isn't it? There we go. All right, now you should be able to see my iPad. So, so we're up and running now, so it should be in good shape. Okay, let's get right into it. We have spent enough time going over silly stuff and trying to get everything to work correctly. So I want to just go over some closing problems with you. I say closing problems, just some debits and credits. You know, one of the things you need to know for the real estate exam is you're going to need to know that there's a closing statement. And so we're going to have Let me go back. You know what? I'm going to go back out here and see if there is something that already has some lines in it that we could use. Um, well, we could use this paper right here. I'll try that. Um, so you're going to have um, you're going to have some problems, and there's going to be a buyer's side and a seller's side. And you're going to have what we call debits and credits on both sides here. So, and I'm just going to go through and put some check marks here. So you're going to have, um, you know, what's the word I'm looking for here? You're going to have some items that will pertain to the closing. Okay. For example, you're going to have a sales price. And one of the things you have to do, and by the way, let me just tell you, if you're new in the course or you haven't gotten to this section yet, hey, don't worry about it. This is good for you to kind of be introduced to it now, and not a big problem. So you're going to have a sales price. And the question is going to be, is this a debit to the buyer or a credit to the buyer? Is it a debit to the seller or a credit to the seller? And you're going to have to make a determination and choose, well, how does this get posted on the closing statement? I had two closings today. The market's very good, so be excited you're getting your real estate license. But I had fairly large farm that I closed today, my daughter and I. And so think in terms of this. If you were, and again, when I say a debit, that's a charge, and a credit would be just what it means. It's a credit. Just like when you use your charge card or debit card at the store, they're going to take money away from your account, right? If you go back to the store and take something back and say, hey, I don't like this, what do you expect them to do to your debit, to your bank account? If you put it on your debit card, some places will give you cash back, but sometimes you want them to credit your card back, especially if it's a charge card, perhaps. So if a seller was paying $400,000 for a home, would this be a debit or a credit? Well, if you were buying it, just like you went to Schnucks, the grocery store, when you go up to pay for your groceries, they're going to debit your debit card, right? They're going to take money out of your account. Well, that's a debit. If you're a seller, you're selling your house, so you would then get a credit of 400,000. See that? Now, let's take the next item, which is earnest money. Earnest money is when the seller generally uh, will, pardon me, the buyer, earnest money is when the buyer will put monies down as good faith. So when you get your real estate license and you have some buyers that contact you, they want to purchase a home or write a contract on a home. generally you're going to ask them for some earnest money. And they may say, well, why do we have to put earnest money down? Well, the fact of the matter is, you're asking the seller to really remove their property from the market while you do your inspections, while you do financing, any other contingencies. And, if I'm the seller and you want me to uh, accept your contract, take my house off the market for a short period of time, I want you to show me in good faith that you're serious about this. I mean, I've had some people in the past, literally, I remember one time I wrote a contract and the people got cold feet and they just drug around, didn't do much. And, they were waiting for the financing to expire. And that's back in the day when the contracts were written really, they were more advantageous to the buyer. And so, lo and behold, they didn't buy the house, and I had to put the property back on the market. And we lost like 3 or 4 good weeks of opportunities to sell that property. So, earnest money shows that you as a buyer are sincere about buying their property. Now, let's look at this on the closing statement, okay? So, trying to take that off for just a second. So if you were the buyer's the one who normally puts the earnest money down. If you were going to put $5,000 down, how would this show? Well, it would be a credit to the buyer because this $5,000 is going to come off of the 400. In other words, you're saying we want to pay $400,000 for the home. Here's $5,000 earnest money that you can hold. Now, on the day of closing, we'd like that 5,000 to come back to us and really be in the form of reducing the sales price. Now, a lot of times you're going to say, well, wouldn't the seller get a credit for that? And the answer is no. The credit is just for the buyer. You see that? Now, they could have a question, you have to read them carefully, where the buyer gave the seller the money to hold. Kind of read those carefully. However, on the closing statement, the buyer's still going to get the credit. Okay? I don't think you'll see one where they give the seller the earnest money, but that may just be in there as extra information to try to trip you up. But I don't think it's anything for you to really worry about. So don't panic on that. Now let's talk about the new loan. In this case, if the borrower is getting an 80% LTV, and that LTV is loan to value ratio. So they may give you some problems. And remember, we just do a T problem. If you haven't watched my Math Made Easy, do that. I go over this. Remember, that's part, total, percent. And in this problem, I said it's an 80% loan to value ratio. So 400,000 would be the big number. We know it's 80%. I like to move the decimal over 2 places, so it's 0.80, and we're solving for the down payment. So 400,000 times 0.80 should be $32,000. Now, why did we multiply? Remember, we had the 2 bottom numbers, and our math always tells us to multiply. Now, you could see this same problem, and if they said, if a borrower's putting 32,000 down and they're paying $400,000 for the home, what loan to value ratio did they get? Well, 32,000 divided by, this time see, we divide. Why do we divide? Because we have one top and one bottom. Anytime we have one on top and one on bottom, our math tells us to divide. And you always put this number on top in your calculator first. That's always seems to be my biggest hang up. What do I put in my calculator first? And so the number on top goes in the calculator first. 32,000 divided by 400,000 equals 0.08. And when you move that over, it gives you, I'm going to just double check here. $400,000 times 0.80 equals, they got an 80% loan to value. My apologies. Somebody will really catch me out on that. I was doing that in my head, and that's why you always need to do your calculator. All right. Some of you at home, you caught it. I'm sorry. I goofed up there. They're getting a, I should have done that. So 400,000 times 0.80 equals 320,000. That is the loan amount. So my apologies for messing that up. That's the loan amount, because this was the sales price and this was the loan to value ratio. So this means they're going to have to come up with $80,000. Now, notice I really just worked. I really was double checking my math, because when I took 32,000, when I took 32,000 and I divided that by 400,000, I said, wait a minute, that's only 0.08. What's going on? That doesn't work. So you can see here that when you get your number, work it backwards and make sure that it works, okay? All right, my apologies. But we now know the loan amount, don't we? And it is $320,000. And again, that would be a credit to the buyer. Now, normally have a sales commission, don't we? I mean, that's why you're getting your license, to make some money. And we normally figure the sales commission on the sales price. So commissions are negotiable. Let's just say the commission's 7%. And that is $28,000. And that, pardon me, is not a credit to the, I'm looking over here. I'm going to just start over. $28,000. That's a debit. It's a charge to the seller. Now, we could stop right here without any other closing cost and say, okay, so how much, let's just tally up everything. $28,000 is the only charge, right? The seller has $400,000 is their only credit. So 400,000 minus 28,000 is 372,000. And that gives us 400,000 See how we did that? Now, this is going to be a good way here to go back and look at that. Remember, 400,000 is the charge, and credits are 325,000. So we just take 400,000 minus 325 equals $75,000. And when we add that up, we get $400,000. And see, that makes sense because I was working that problem incorrectly, but $80,000 is what we knew they had to come up with a down payment. However, they've got a credit for their earnest money. So you can kind of see how that works there. Okay, I'm sorry I goofed up a couple times, but it's all right. It's good for you to just see that first of all, I was working that in my head. I said, oh, 400,000 times 0.80 is 32,000. I was like totally way off track. So a couple of things you can learn from this is, number one, don't try to do it without your calculator. And the second very important thing to do, and I stress this, is check your math problems, because you'll miss more. That was a free question, but you know what? They'll have an answer for $80,000 or $32,000. How much down payment did they need? And you could quickly do that incorrectly and mark 32,000, and you missed a free question. I always double check and triple check my math. Okay. Now, we got our pass rates yesterday for Missouri, and I wasn't real happy, although the state average was only 33% first time pass rate. 33. Some schools were less than that. We had a 48%. I had a lot of people take the test. I wasn't happy. I'm not happy with that. Now, granted, and I'm not trying to make excuses, but there were an awful lot of people who took their test in June who also finished the course back in March, and they just couldn't take the test. And I've got to be very honest with you. I was worried they weren't studying through that time period. You've got to stay on your game. Secondly, this is where they'll get you. There are people that will miss the passing by 1 or 2 points. And I'm telling you what, it's on those kinds of mistakes right there. So I'm glad I messed up on that, because I really hope you'll take it and remind yourself, don't screw up like John did on that live streaming. Double and triple check your math. But notice how I was double checking. I wanted to show you how all of that worked. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not working. So all of a sudden it tipped me off. And when I went back and looked at the question, I knew exactly what I'd done wrong. So, I'm not trying to make excuses, but I'm just saying I want you to double check your math too, so you don't let any of those slip by. And I want you to study hard. This is just, yesterday, I was with the leadership team of Missouri Realtors, and I'm going to be, and I'm excited about you getting your license. So I'm going to be president for Missouri Realtors in 2 years. I'm treasurer now. And so the leadership team did a live road show, and I was over at Rolla, Missouri, and had a lady come up to me and she said, John, my grandson's in your class, and he's taking the test and he didn't pass it. And she said, he's a smart guy, and he's gone to college, and he's just devastated. And I hated to hear that. But, I was just thinking to myself, this is a hard test. And if you finish the school in March or April and you said, oh, I'll just pick back up the week I go take my test, forget it. It's just not going to happen. Okay. You got to be studying very hard all the way up until the time you take the test. Now she left, and I'm like feeling really cruddy because her grandson didn't pass the test. And I said, have him call me. I want to help him. I want you all to know, most of you know, when you reach out to me, I'm either calling you, uh, getting in touch with you by video bomb, my email message system. But I'm always here to help you. I want you to know that. I have a passion to see you become a real estate rock star and to pass that test. But after she left, I'm feeling really cruddy. And this other lady comes up to me who's a broker there, and she said, hey, I had two people just go through your test and they both passed. So, study hard and you'll do well. Okay. All right. So let's go back over and take a look. I don't want to go too long tonight. I've got a couple of things I need to do outside before it gets dark, but I want to go back and do a couple more items with you. Um, so we're looking at some of the things here. So I'm going to go over, and again, I'm just going to put the sales price, and I'm going to put buyer and seller. So in this case, remember the sales price is a debit to the buyer and a credit to the seller. We had earnest money, and that would be a credit to the buyer only. Okay. Then we also put the new loan in there, and that would be a credit to the buyer, and there would be nothing to the seller for that. However, there's going to be a mortgage payoff or a loan, and that is going to be a debit to the seller. That's their loan. They've got to pay that off. Now, normally you will have what is called accrued interest with that note. And that is going to be a debit to the seller. Now, don't forget, interest is always paid in arrears for the seller. It's always paid that way. I mean, the buyer as well. However, you've got to make sure you understand this. When this was July 1st, just a few days ago, right? So my mortgage payment is actually due on the 14th. So when I make my mortgage payment on the 14th, I'm actually paying from June 14th through July 14th. See that? Because interest is always paid in arrears. So when you make your mortgage payment, you're paying for the month that you've already stayed there. Now, if we were selling our home and we were closing on the 20th of July, again, we're in July here, we know what our payoff is for this date. They'll give you that on the closing in the problem. We're going to know what the payoff is because they're going to tell us what the payoff was here, and we're going to have to calculate the interest. And I've got plenty of math problems you'll do that. So we're going to know what the payoff is for the 14th, but we have to figure what's called accrued interest between the 14th and the 20th, 6 days. They'll tell you what day to count, but you're going to have some accrued interest. And that, see here, is going to be a debit to the seller. Now, the buyer gets their loan today. We're going to just do it the opposite. So I'm going to do this in red, okay? So the buyer gets their, today is what? We're closing on the 20th. The buyer gets their new loan on the 20th. Some lenders want the payment to be always due on the 1st. So you're going to have, as a buyer, interest between the 20th and the 31st. Does that make sense? So you may have 11 days of interest. And again, this interest is going to be a debit to the buyer. Now, what's interesting is if you were closing on the 20th, you pay this 11 days of interest, your first payment will not be due until September 1st. And you say, why September 1st? Wouldn't it be due August 1st? No, remember, interest is always paid in arrears, but you went ahead and prepaid your 11 days of interest for the month of July. So now you won't have a payment due until September 1st. Kind of interesting. Sometimes you have a closing on the 2nd or 3rd of the month, and they pay 27 days or 28 days of prepaid interest, and then their payment won't be due till September 1st. So you're like, gosh, we're closing on July 3rd, but our payment's not due till September 1st. Well, you did pay your August payment, the interest due, you just paid it on the day of closing. Hopefully that's not too confusing for you. Okay, so I want to go back over here real quickly and cover a couple more. So on the exam, here's what's interesting. I remember, and you probably heard me talk about this before, I remember reading this one question. It was almost nauseating when you saw it because it was like that thick. It was like, and they had charges and credits and loan amounts and interest rates and days for closing. And I mean, I read through it, and like I said, it was like, oh man, this is awful. Because I'm like, I got to go through and start pulling all this stuff out and figuring out a closing problem. And then I get to the end of the problem and it says, how is the earnest money shown on the closing statement? It's a credit to the buyer. It was like they just wanted to freak you out with all of this junk. And then the question they wanted had nothing to do with anything else in the problem. So I'm telling you that a lot of taking this test is psychological. Don't just because you click the mouse button and you see a whole paragraph of junk freak you out. Just read through it, take your time, say thanks that you're healthy, you're not in a hospital, and you have the opportunity to come and take this real estate test. Be grateful for that. But secondly, read those questions a couple times and really look to see what they're asking you to answer. So now I've got a few more of these that we could go over. Commission, we had that one, didn't we? And that's always going to be a debit to the seller. Most of the other things they would have here, you could see a loan assumption. We'll talk about that next week, maybe some, because that's going to get a little bit, with a loan assumption, that's going to be really, it's just like the buyer getting a new loan. It's going to be a credit to the buyer, but it's also going to be a debit to the seller. Okay, so Where here we only have one credit for the buyer on a loan assumption. There's two entries on that. There's a credit to the buyer, just like their new loan, but it's a debit to the seller, just like they're paying off their mortgage. Does that make sense? Because basically they do have a loan, so they have to pay that off. So you're just charging the seller and crediting the buyer for that amount. And then we have taxes that we'll go over. But one of the other nice things about all of this is they're going to tell you, they're going to tell you who's paying for the other charges. They're also going to give you the number of days of the month on prorating and some things like that. So a lot of the other information will be pretty much pointed out who's paying for what. And then you're just going to add up your debits and credits and subtract, just like we did earlier. And you're going to find out how much will the seller get to take home and how much will the buyer be responsible to bring to the closing table. So we're going to do that next week. I'm going to take you through a full closing problem. We're going to go through that, but just wanted to kind of get you a little prepped up, get you some information for this and help you out there. Now, let me go out and see if we have any. I'm going to take my camera off for just a second here. And I'm going to go to YouTube and just see if we have any questions. Shows I'm live now. There's a few of us watching. So yeah, working now. So there was no sound. Good. Anybody have any questions they want to type in, go right ahead. I'm going to wait for just a minute and help you out. So if you have any questions, feel free to, I'm going to stop the share on my screen there. Anybody have anything they want to add? I will take a look. I was just going to see if it's still. Feel free to, I'm going to stop the share on my screen there. Looks like I am broadcasting. So I'm just seeing if there are any other questions anybody has. You can always email me as well. All right, I hope this was helpful. Next week, we'll go into a full-fledged closing problem. Always feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or need help. Thanks for watching. I will talk to you next week. Have a great day.